How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, live today on May 24th. To wrap up the week, I got another round of stories to get to around the NFL, some on OTAs and just some around the National Football League as well. So we'll start off with the AFC South quarterback rankings to get us started. Then we're going to move on to the NFL potentially looking at going to an 18-game regular season. Roger Goodell cleared up some of his comments on that, so I'll get into those. And plus, on the other side as well, we're going to talk about CeeDee Lamb and another update around his contract negotiations, maybe a reason why he hasn't signed or extended those negotiation talks with the Dallas Cowboys. All of that coming up on today's episode. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I do start, a reminder, if you guys have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that, your question will pop up on my screen. I can read it on air and just get your guys' perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics. It's a massive help for the show. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link with any of your questions or comments. But in saying that, we can move on to the first topic, a continual series on here, the quarterback rankings across the divisions in the NFL. This time we're going to take a pit stop at the AFC South, and a pretty interesting one by the title of the live stream and the title of the videos afterwards. You'll see that this is a young division overall for all four starting quarterbacks, so it was pretty fun to project it, and it was pretty challenging. But from worst to first, we're going to start off going at that number 4 spot, starting off with Anthony Richardson. Pretty difficult to have him here, honestly, just because I think talent-wise, he has pretty much all of it. He had a couple games where he really impressed me, and I'm sure you impressed a lot of people. I want to say it was the games against the Jaguars and the Los Angeles Rams where he performed very well throwing the ball, running it, and he kept the Colts in both of those games and just really showed a little glimpse of what kind of quarterback he can be. Has a tremendous build. You know, he's huge. He can run the ball very well. He did it well at Florida State and now, or at Florida, I should say, and also now transitioning to the NFL. How was that going to translate to playing against grown men? And it didn't seem like he skipped a beat, but on the flip side of that, you know, so much running and so much physicality in his game did wind up, you know, causing him to miss a majority of the season. He only played a handful of games. I want to say it was maybe 6, no more than 8 or 7 overall for Anthony Richardson. So it was from that point of view that I had to have him here just because he missed the majority of his first season. So from that point of view, I can't really put him higher just because he has pretty much all of it. For performing so well with the talent around him as well. And you could see that in those games, he really kept them in it through his playmaking, through his throws, his running ability and stuff like that. But again, because he missed most of his first year, I put him in at the number 4 spot. But it just raises the expectations a little bit this year because you got so much of a little glimpse in that first year with a handful of games. Going forward, it's certainly going to be exciting. They got another piece in A.D. Mitchell through the draft, which I think is going to help this offense tremendously. A bit more excitement with Anthony Richardson coming back. So a lot of expectations in his second season, but for now, he'll be number 4 on my list, which means at number 3, I have Will Levis, another first-year quarterback trying to figure out his way through the NFL in his first year. He, unlike Anthony Richardson, had some of those trials and tribulations that you find yourself in the first year trying to maneuvering through being named the starting quarterback after a handful of games, performing very well in his first game against the Atlanta Falcons, and then there were some ups and downs, and now heading into this season, another new system being implemented under Brian Callahan as the new head coach. So that is on the downside that he has to learn a whole other system now in his second year, but I think it'll be a lot better than what he would be running with Vrabel this past season. Not that it was bad, but I just think having a more open offense, a spread look on offense with the receivers that he now has in DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, and Tyler Boyd as well, I think that will fit his play style a little bit more. He'll have more options to throw to. A decent running game, with Tony Pollard and the other options they have at running back should open it up a little bit more. I'm sure they'd want to get a little bit stronger there, but the way that Brian Callahan plays, sort of coming over from the Cincinnati Bengals and trying to translate that over to the Tennessee Titans, I think there is something to be excited about. This offense now has more talent around it, more excitement. It really just comes down to Will Levis, and he showed, again, some glimpses in the first year where you look at him. I want to say it was the game a game that I was watching against the Steelers where he played very well. I didn't know too much about him, but in that game, he certainly impressed me. Then afterwards, he went on the road against the Miami Dolphins and beat them when it was close to playoff time and really hurt their chances. So there were some moments where you look at him and think, wow, like this guy really knows what he's doing for a first-year quarterback. He had his ups and downs, but he did have those moments that people will look to and try to build off of those games and build off of the good things he did in those games. So I think if they could get Will Levis right, this Tennessee Titans team could surprise a lot of people. I'm not going to rank them based on where they're going to finish, but I like the talent that they have, and I like their offense especially, and their defense as well a little bit, adding L'Jarius Sneed to a very talented group anyway. But for right now, Will Levis, how he translates into his second year, will have him in as my number 3 quarterback on my list. Then, at number 2, Trevor Lawrence, pretty similar to some of the other quarterbacks, or just really the only one left after Trevor Lawrence, obviously, but a number 1 overall pick. The type of hype that he got and attention he received coming out of college and through his time in Clemson, then getting drafted to the Jaguars, you kind of threw the first season in the bin just because it never really panned out with Urban Meyer and all the off-the-field distractions and stuff that just got in the way of football and his development. You sort of gave him a pass for that first year because you saw the talent there, but to see how it played out in his first year, it just threw everybody off. And then in his second year in 2022, you saw that sort of projection that he could be in the NFL. He had a pretty solid year in 2022. He won the division. He made it to the wild card round, came back in that game against the Chargers, and then moved on, and they ended up losing. But in 2022, it certainly was his first game, or 2022 was his first year where you sort of saw, all right, this is the sort of Trevor Lawrence we thought. And then moving into this past year now, they had a great start. A lot of people will obviously forget it because of how they ended. It didn't go the way that they wanted, how they lost the division there and just lost a good amount of their games in the bottom half of the NFL season. So from that standpoint, and then moving forward, how he sort of builds off of that, he has a good case to exceed his expectations now with another year under Doug Peterson. I think that's a great match for him to further develop his skills. But the biggest thing with me with Trevor Lawrence, why I'm sort of, I want to put him higher. I think a lot of people expected him to be in more conversations around MVP or Offensive Player of the Year, those sort of conversations with Trevor Lawrence because of how much attention he received. But at the end of the day, it always seems like you want to say he's good, but then there's always a but or except this or except that. That's reason with Trevor Lawrence where I don't want to get into the whole contract talks with him, but also why people might be questioning such a massive deal for him if he gets that extension of around $50 million. Does he deserve that much based on what you've seen? That's a whole other debate, but it all wraps up in this conversation of Trevor Lawrence, how much better can he go, and how much better can we see him take this Jacksonville Jaguars team that has some talent, but also they're going to heavily rely on Trevor Lawrence, I believe, if they're going to have any chance of winning that division and going further in the playoffs. It's up to him to take that further step, and if he does that, he has all the tools and arm talent to do it. You just have to finally see it out there because there is a lot of good quarterback competition in the NFL. So he slides in at number 2 for me, meaning that the obvious number 1, I guess it is a little bit of a surprise just because, having a rookie, that's 3 rookies in this division. But CJ Stroud was far and away the best one, had one of the best seasons for a rookie quarterback. His passer rating of 100.8 was the third best by a rookie in NFL history. Led all rookies in all major passing categories as well. And not just a credit to him for how great he looked and how awesome he made Tank Dell look, Nico Collins. He didn't put them on the map, but he really accentuated their talent and really made a lot of opposing defenses now start to game plan around them, start to look at them in a different light, because now they have a quarterback to be able to throw it to really show off all of their abilities. And same goes the other way around for CJ Stroud. If he doesn't have those receivers, would we see a great season like he had? He finished 8th in passing yards, over 4,000, 23 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions for a rookie. That ratio is very good. And also, a bigger credit to the organization for really changing this organization from where it was 3 years ago to where it is now looked at as one of the major contenders in the AFC. A lot of credit goes to the organization, but it's not as easy as a lot of people make it sound to find that quarterback. I'm really high on CJ Stroud, just his mentality, and he has all the physical traits and all the arm ability that you'd want. To have that mentality and have all these guys believe in you, be that leader at such a young age, I think deserves a lot more credit than maybe a lot of people don't really put on it or give CJ Stroud credit for. And we found out how good he was, but also, how good the rest of this team was as well. And they exceeded expectations in all reality last year, but now how he makes that transition now from being the hunter to being the hunted in that division, not only in that division, but in the entire conference. Everyone is already putting them in contention for the AFC Championship game, at least the AFC Divisional round, as one of the higher seeds. So how does their mentality change, and how does he lead them now into a different sort of mindset with everyone trying to give them their best shot? That'll be certainly something that I'm looking out for. I think he's capable of doing it. Again, credit to the Texans and CJ for his development and building this roster. They have the talent around him to do it, but as well, he has all the makings of a great young quarterback to certainly compete among the Mahomes, the Allens, the Lamar Jacksons, the Joe Burrows. The AFC is going to be super interesting to watch and super fun to watch this season. If everyone stays healthy, we should be in store for some awesome games in 2024. But that'll do it for my list. Let me know what you guys think of it. The order was right. A lot of young quarterbacks in that division. I know Trevor Lawrence is the oldest one at around 25, 26 years old. So let me know what you guys think of my rankings. Do you like it? Do you like the reasons? Let it be known in the live chat box or in the comments section afterwards. But we'll move on to a quick break right now. And on the other side, we'll talk about the NFL potentially moving to an 18-game regular season, and also more contract updates on CeeDee Lamb, why he hasn't signed that negotiation or that new deal. That will be in store in just a few seconds. And also looking at Caleb Williams and how he's been doing in the Chicago Bears OTAs practices this week. Some good and some bad certainly coming from that. I'll give you more details when we return in just a few moments here.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. To jump into the second segment, the NFL more on them potentially going into an 18-game regular season. I talked about this before in a previous episode about Roger Goodell mentioning it briefly on the Pat McAfee show. This was back during the NFL draft time after the first night of the NFL draft. Roger Goodell was on the show, and he sort of tossed it out there as a possibility maybe that he would like to see less preseason games really and just more high quality football on the screen for the fans to enjoy. And that's where it was brought up again now that the NFL owners had another recent meeting in Nashville this week. So that was also brought up again, and it was brought up to Roger Goodell specifically about, you know, having this whole possibility and when sort of can we see this transition into a reality. And Roger Goodell was asked some questions about it, and he sort of clarified what he meant by those regards back about a month ago now. He said, "I wasn't floating something that we're actively thinking about now. It is something that we think about in the long-range context." And he also said that he was exploring ways to a later Super Bowl really was another major point as to why he brought up those remarks in the first place, really wanting it to fall during President's Day weekend. But the main thing that he really emphasized was that this isn't like about to happen. This won't be a decision that comes next offseason potentially, but it is in the thinkings, in some conversations with some owners and just around the NFL. The NFL has gone 3 seasons already with the 17-game, regulation through the 17-game structure of their season, but there are some rumblings over, extending it now more and more, trying to grow it even further to bring more high-quality games onto the television for a lot of NFL fans. And he mentioned it, Roger Goodell, that he's not really a fan of the preseason, like I said. He thinks that even 3 preseason games is a bit too much, and said that an 18-game regular season ratio to only 2 preseason games is not unreasonable at this point of how the NFL is growing. And that's sort of where I want to bring up this, question about, how long realistically do we have until we see the NFL go to 18 games, because of a few factors that I've sort of gathered here today to bring to the table. But first off, the concerns with going to an 18-game regular season are obviously the health and safety ones, being the ones that need the most attention. A lot of conversation is about adding another bye week also to an 18-game regular season, but that also would push the entire season with the playoffs included in the Super Bowl back to President's Day weekend. So that all sort of would work itself out there if that were to be the case. And they would also need to collectively bargain the schedule change with the Players Union, which I'm sure, like you all know, isn't something that is a one conversation sort of situation. This would be something that they would probably start maybe towards the end of this year at the earliest, I would think, and then conclude in maybe a year or two afterwards, probably a year realistically. But again, going through it with the player union, how they feel about it, collectively bargaining that whole situation is something that, again, would take a lot of time. And with also the topic of growing the international games specifically to pile on more of the travel, the tiredness, the time changing, and just the jet lag some players receive from these long journeys. The NFL is going down to Brazil today, not today, this year on a Friday. So that's something good that they're going to not play on Sunday, and they're going to have an extra time to play in week 2. So that's also great. But, that starts to pile up on you, not to mention all the travel. But if you add another game onto it and how the bye weeks play out, trying to monitor how all these players perform in these games, not to make sure that the level doesn't drop because you suffer more injuries now. More players are just tired and are lackadaisical out there. So that's something else that you don't just want to extend the NFL schedule just to extend it. You want to make sure every game is of a high quality, and it is a little bit tricky there monitoring it because of the tiredness, and maybe some players, some games don't live up to the standard, which is something that could become a problem if it starts to repeat itself over the weeks of an 18-game regular season. And that's really my last point, the quality of games keeping up for 18 games of an NFL regular season. It is interesting now how also on that topic and on that point, it almost seems, planning it into my sort of theoretical plot that I have built up in some of these topics that I talk about. When they take away the hip drop tackle, when they change the kickoff rule as well, taking out some of the physicality and taking out some of the plays where players can get injured more, really making it an emphasis to try and keep all the players on the field to provide the highest quality for these NFL games. It is interesting now that you see those things be modified, and then you start bringing up the idea of an 18-game regular season. It always just plays almost perfectly into a sort of plan, as if the NFL, they probably have been thinking about it, honestly, for quite some time now to extend it. But you take away the hip drop tackle, you make the kickoffs a lot safer. Now you want to add an 18-game regular season. Now that seems possible because the game itself is a lot healthier, or a lot safer, I should say, and you don't have players running into each other at over 20 miles an hour on kickoffs, have these high speed collisions out there on the field. You don't have players rolling over other star players and getting injured that way. You take some of those things out of the game, now you could really start thinking of an 18-game regular season as being more likely, more safe for these players if some of these dangerous parts of the game that most fans know and love are taken out of it. That's where the pushback comes, with some fans not being a fan of taking away the hip drop tackle or making changes to the kickoff rule. But again, the NFL is sort of just pushing that agenda to extend the season, I believe. And on that note, Roger Goodell also continued his remarks on this whole topic about extending it, saying that making sure that we're doing everything possible to bring our fans what they want. They want, obviously, more football, but I'm not sure they want more preseason football, which, again, goes back to him not being a fan of the preseason at all. And some players also, chimed in on this conversation. The 49ers starting quarterback, Brock Purdy, was asked about it at OTAs. He said he's not 100% sure how he would feel about it at this moment. There's some good and some bad that comes along with it, according to him, but he thinks adding an additional bye week would be great for the players and keeping up their energy and their health. And also, Nick Bosa was asked about it, and he gave a funnier response. Clearly not a fan of it from his responses, if you haven't seen them on any form of social media. He thinks that the current setup is just fine. He actually said that the 16-game regular season was fine. He doesn't understand why the NFL keeps adding on to the schedule, but, he seemed pretty unbothered by it. He said he'd play it, but he's just not a fan of it, but he'll just end up doing it anyway. So that was pretty interesting that you have one answer from Brock Purdy, and Nick Bosa, on the other hand, definitely not a fan of these changes. And I guess it is to be expected. You have a quarterback who really can't be hit anymore, and you have Nick Bosa out there trying to maneuver through all these new rules, trying not to hit the quarterback too hard, and just getting hit basically on every play. You can sort of see why the responses are what they are, but that is from the player side of it. And now also on the owner side of it, New York Giants owner John Mara also commented on it at the owners meeting this past week, and he said, "I can't say I'm necessarily crazy about extending the season. I worry more about player fatigue and wear and tear on the players moving forward." And the most interesting part of his remarks were that he said that he feels that most of the owners already are in favor of expanding the season to 18 games. So eventually, he sort of just feels that it's going to happen. He's not a big fan of it for the reasons I listed out before, but it is interesting how he sort of gave a little bit of a giveaway there that it is sort of closer than a lot of people would assume. This conversation just was brought up earlier this offseason with those remarks I said that Roger Goodell made actually on the Pat McAfee show about a month ago. And now with the international games and the new ruling from the NFL starting in 2025 with the international games going up to 9 games. It also sort of sets up the NFL that way in expanding the schedule because you make that jump from 5 games to 9 games and more teams are going abroad and more teams are traveling all over the world. You'd have to add, in my understanding of it, in my logical sort of processing of all of this, you'd have to add another game on the schedule because if more teams are going abroad and more teams like the Jaguars are playing a couple of games internationally, you'd have to add another game on there just to sort of give them another maybe home game or just another game on American soil, which is something to look out for as well. You don't want half, or you would essentially have half of the season be international with this new ruling and half of the games be half of the games for some teams be just in the United States with the 9 international games, and then you have the other weeks that are just all on the American soil as well. So that's something interesting to monitor as that goes on, how the international games sort of play into all of this. And also, probably at the latest, Roger Goodell also touched on it, that 2026 would probably be the most likely sort of year where I would assume these conversations become a bit more concrete. I'd have to imagine with how fast the sport is growing, with how much more eyes are on the NFL nowadays, with new streaming platforms, growing the game to Spain. There's going to be a game in Madrid next year, possibly Australia, like we talked about before. Growing it this much, I think it's only a matter of time before you put out more content to satisfy all these new fans, new eyes on the game, which is good. From a fan perspective, you always want to see more football, but again, the players are really the biggest hurdle with all of this. It's not great also to sort of tail off a little bit with how the running back market is nowadays. Adding another game to it, adding more wear and tear to these guys, I think in my mind it'll only lessen the running back market because you have more of these guys maybe suffering injuries, unfortunately, and how does that make it more undervalued as the years goes on? I think that's one group that would certainly be against the 18-game regular season because of their current circumstance, but right now it's all under an uncertainty umbrella. Will this happen? How will it all transition? But it is something that I think will eventually happen sooner rather than later, and it shortens the offseason as well. Obviously, the players won't be happy about it. But at the end of the day, it just seems like the NFL is trying to jump ahead of these trends, not trying to stay behind and lose some potential new avenues they could explore. They're going to keep growing the game, and I think probably in 2026 at the latest, we'll see the NFL go to 18 games. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, where the quality of the game will be by then. But for right now, we're going to move on to the next topic. And on the other side of the break, we'll talk about CeeDee Lamb and his contract updates after the first week of OTAs have concluded. Plus, Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick, struggling in OTAs, why I don't think that's such a bad thing after the first week of OTAs, and also why the NFL might be planning a Super Bowl in Nashville, Tennessee in 2028. More details on all those stories just in a few seconds. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Now moving on to our third topic on today's episode. the situation around CeeDee Lamb and his contract negotiations, and just updating you guys on top of that. It has been a week now since CeeDee Lamb made it into the OTA portion of the offseason. You know, he has gone this whole week. Was he going to be there? Was he not going to be there? It was interesting at the end of the day to see that he wasn't there. You know, it is a period where some players, it is accepted for some to not make an appearance. You know, just off the top of my head, you have Christian McCaffrey not there, Matthew Judon not there. So it isn't something basically that's, you know, groundbreaking for some instances. It really just depends on the situation, but this has been an ongoing thing for some time now, and because of CeeDee Lamb and how important this negotiation not only solely is for the Cowboys, but also thinking of it big picture, you add on that how Dak Prescott is going and also Micah Parsons not too far into the future. It is something to certainly keep an eye on, because so far it seems, according to NFL media, that the Cowboys are willing to let the market determine CeeDee Lamb's value, and that is playing a pretty risky game. In my opinion, if the Cowboys are willing to sit back. I mean, I guess they are already sitting back and sort of buying their time a little bit with CeeDee Lamb. But on top of that, NFL media sources continued, and they reported that CeeDee Lamb is likely to wait and see what happens with Justin Jefferson and T. Higgins and their contract negotiations before he really locks in on trying to negotiate anything with the Dallas Cowboys. That was reported from NFL media and the NFL Network. So I thought that was really a pretty pivotal moment in these negotiations, just because it sort of shows a little bit now that I think it validates more CeeDee Lamb's holdout, if you guys are following me, just by saying that he's willing to wait and not be too pressed about going back to these practices, these mandatory mini camps that's supposed to start in June, these OTA period of the offseason. It shows that he's almost really going fully in on holding out and really just getting the best contract for himself and the value that he holds in his mind based on the season that he had. On those two receivers that he mentioned, you know, Justin Jefferson and T. Higgins. T. Higgins hasn't signed his free agent tender yet, so he's still holding out and he hopes to get extended, but it seems like ultimately he'll end up playing on that franchise tag at the end of the day. But by not signing it, he's actually not allowed to be back in these team activities. So the longer he holds out, the longer the absence will grow with him at OTAs. And on top of that, now you look at Justin Jefferson and his situation with the Minnesota Vikings, similar to last year where it seemed like it was going great and there was some good talks between the organization and Justin Jefferson. And it is the same story this year. They have been making progress, according to Minnesota's general manager, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensa. He said with the draft coming up, obviously this was a month ago now, he said with the draft coming up back then that they were going to take some time and take a break from the contract negotiations before they decided to pick it up after the NFL draft to fully focus on those talks and how much money they're obviously going to give Justin Jefferson. I saw another post today, or it was yesterday, I think, by Adam Schefter, that these negotiations are indeed going pretty well, and that Justin Jefferson and the Vikings may be pushing to make Justin Jefferson the highest paid non-quarterback ever in NFL history. Right now, I want to say that's Nick Bosa, earning around $34 million per year. And to think that Justin Jefferson is going to get something like that, potentially even more, where does that put the Dallas Cowboys if this report does end up being accurate about CeeDee Lamb waiting to see what Justin Jefferson gets before he starts talking seriously with the Dallas Cowboys? Right now, Justin Jefferson is certainly able to make more than the $32 million that A.J. Brown makes. But talking now about $34 million, maybe even more, to be fully the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, would there ever be a scenario where he'd get 35? You know, I don't think that's crazy at this moment to say. With the numbers that are being thrown around the NFL, obviously mostly with quarterbacks, but I think why this is taking so long with Justin Jefferson is because we could see something very monumental to happen here in this offseason, potentially for the Vikings. And again, where does that leave now the Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb? Because before, I was of the mindset that, Dak was at a situation where, the Cowboys have to focus in on that and try and re-sign him because he is and has been their quarterback for the recent years and has brought him to the playoffs, and he's coming off one of his best years. But on top of that, just being the quarterback, that should be priority. But again, I was of the mindset that CeeDee Lamb, if you're talking about talent and going forward and who would be projected to maybe give you more in those years, I would have probably had CeeDee Lamb as my top priority to re-sign before I'd get to Dak Prescott, because obviously there's more money to be given to quarterbacks, so that was also another reason for my thinking. But now the question becomes, do you put Dak Prescott now as the priority over CeeDee Lamb? Because if it is true that he is waiting to see what Justin Jefferson gets and the Cowboys sort of can't jump ahead of these other contract negotiations to work out a deal that suits them better rather than what suits CeeDee Lamb better, does that now make Dak Prescott the number one priority for them to get done, figure out the quarterback? And if at the end of the day you don't want to give CeeDee Lamb that amount of money, it's okay because you at least have the quarterback there to then bring in some more wide receivers and have him still in your building rather than maybe losing both of them. I think that is something that has become a reality now for the Cowboys. If CeeDee Lamb is really pushing for this much money, it puts them in a bind, obviously, now, because on top of them not signing any free agents, it just worsens their salary cap. It puts them more in a bind if they're giving a lot more money to CeeDee Lamb now and also trying to fit Dak's contract into it now. It's becoming more and more evident now that, like we said before in the past, that it seems like the Cowboys are just going to have to decide between some of them. And on top of that, Micah Parsons isn't too far behind. I want to say the highest paid defensive lineman right now, other than the defensive tackles. I know Chris Jones is making well over 20, or he's making well over 30 now as the defensive tackle. Nick Bosa is the highest at 34 for a defensive lineman. Micah Parsons, I'm sure, fits himself in among the top pass rushers as well. So to say he wants to be paid around there, and maybe CeeDee Lamb as well, that's obviously not going to work out for the Cowboys. And if it does somehow work out, how's the rest of the team going to look if you have all of your salary cap going to Micah, CeeDee, and maybe Dak, if you somehow work a miracle there and have all three of them on some of the highest paid players at their positions? The rest of your team is certainly going to falter, and it's not going to live up to the expectations now that you have with the Dallas Cowboys. So the question obviously now is, do you make Dak the priority? And also, do you value having the best player at one position or having good players, solid players all over your roster? I would settle for the latter in that situation. I think, it's going to hurt to lose either Dak, CeeDee. I don't think they're going to get rid of Micah. It's really going to come down to CeeDee or Dak Prescott. It's going to hurt, certainly. And the way the NFL goes now, without a quarterback, it doesn't seem that you could really be taken seriously, especially in the NFC, where if you have a good team, you only really have to compete with the Lions and the 49ers as the legit threats, and I'll throw the Philadelphia Eagles in there as well. Those three teams, and then if you have another great quarterback like Jordan Love is sort of starting to ascend into that, you can really push some of these teams for contending for NFC championship games over and over again. And that's another reason why maybe the cards are sort of stacking against CeeDee Lamb, where he might have to, just by default, by how the NFL set up, you need a quarterback, maybe be moving on after this year if he doesn't get the contract that he needs, and it just becomes a very bad situation also in the future and in the present for the Cowboys, because this season they're already low at some depth at some of their positions on offense, the running back, offensive line, and say you have a pretty bad relationship with your wide receiver. He's holding out. He's not playing 100% because he has his contract on his mind. The same thing goes for Dak Prescott. They know they're not going to be on the team anyway next year, so how does that factor into their performance on the field? Say they have a bad year this year, then they lose one of these two guys in the next year or so, then where do you go from there? Very delicate situation right now for the Dallas Cowboys with this recent development on CeeDee Lamb. I don't think it's out of line for CeeDee to do this. Obviously, he's looking out for himself, wants more security in the future with the money that he has certainly earned after this year, being among the top wide receivers in terms of the numbers that he put out there, and really crediting some of Dak Prescott's performance to him as well. It goes hand in hand. Dak played well because CeeDee played well, and CeeDee played well because Dak also had a phenomenal year. It's going to stink when the Cowboys potentially lose one of these two players, but it is sort of the bed now that they have to lay in, that they've sort of set for themselves with not extending them earlier and sort of having them pile up now towards the same period where you have to make a decision now, where that couldn't have been the case before if you were pre-active and extended them before. But this could become a bit uglier for the Dallas Cowboys, uglier than it has been the last few years. So we'll see where this team ends up. They're going to be in the playoff race, I think, just because of that division. They might not be top of the division because of the Eagles, but they'll be in the wild card race. But this could really be the last chance we see this core of Cowboys players together before some major changes come in 2025 and 2026 potentially. So leave your guys' thoughts on that topic. But for the meantime, we'll be moving on with the show. A few more topics to talk about on today's episode. Caleb Williams' struggles at OTAs, what some of his teammates are saying about it, and as well his head coach and Matt Eberflus. Then more on Roger Goodell talking about a potential future Super Bowl coming to the city of Nashville, Tennessee. The pros and cons about that and more details coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Moving right along with the show, before I jump into the next segment on Caleb Williams and how he's performing at OTAs, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, use the GSMCpodcast.net link you see on your screen. This makes sure that I can see your comment pop up in my chat box and read it out loud and just get your guys' perspective or point of view on anything I say or on any of the topics. It's a major help for this show. So again, if you could, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCpodcast.net, as well with any of your questions or comments. And also, I forgot to mention it on the last segment, Dave's channel actually provided a comment as well saying, CJ Stroud, top dog in a young quarterback, of the young quarterbacks in the South. So I agree. I think he has all the tools to be the top quarterback, not just currently, but also going forward with the team that they have. I certainly agree there with Dave's channel's point. But in saying that, we'll move on to the next topic. Caleb Williams, another very exciting quarterback, another top draft pick, not last year, but obviously this year in the NFL draft. Early on, there was a lot of great news coming from Caleb Williams, with this football in shorts and t-shirts sort of period of the offseason, and not playing against the defense currently in the phase one part of the offseason. Everything was great. Caleb was making some awesome throws. Rome Odunze looked great. Caleb Williams was going to be a Hall of Famer. That sort of talk you get with some of the overhyped news you get to start the offseason. But now, this week, with OTA starting, you get some 11-on-11, 7-on-7, still without pads on, but you at least get to play the opposing defense. And on the first day, on Tuesday, the Chicago Bears safety Kevin Byard said that Caleb Williams took it to the defense on the first day of OTAs, but yesterday it was the first time the media was allowed at practice, and Caleb Williams and the offense this time struggled a lot more against that defense on the 7-on-7 drills and the 11 versus 11 in the red zone as well. Caleb Williams in those drills only had 4 completions and was sacked 5 times. It was also reported by The Athletic's John Green at the practice, and just off of the reports he got from the practice, he said there were a few just missed interceptions. Sometimes Williams couldn't even get the passes off as the secondary used its space advantage in the red zone to shut down receivers. Occasionally, the offense struggled to line up or get a play off as well. I think it's important to preface that there was no Rome Odunze, there was no Keenan Allen, or also the whole right side of the starting offensive line for Caleb Williams. And the offense there, not an excuse, but just something to keep in mind that certainly does affect some of the outcomes. But defensive coordinator Eric Washington also acknowledged the defense's great performance yesterday on Thursday. Said it was a good day for them. They were flying around, and they were really salty from the first day. So they came out there sort of trying to get some revenge on the young quarterback, and they were successful in that. Now, is this a big deal at this point of the offseason to see Caleb Williams struggle? I think it's a big deal, but for not for the reason that a lot of people would think. You know, some people would look at this and say, oh, you know, Caleb Williams, he wasn't everything everyone was talking about. You know, I knew he wasn't really that kind of quarterback to be drafted number 1. People are just waiting for a reason to jump on him and, you know, prove that he wasn't one of the greatest talents we've seen recently come out of college. But I think it's a big deal, but for the reason that it just puts more of a challenge on the plate for Caleb Williams. And at the end of the day, you don't want everything being so great that it almost seems flawless right now for Caleb Williams and almost too easy for him. You know, there is going to be that transition period, and it's more important to have it now at this point where you can correct it right after the play and see what went wrong as well in some situations, rather than having him breeze through the whole offseason. The defense maybe not trying as hard as they can on the number 1 overall pick, and then once the season comes, you know, you have all these problems and all these struggles and mistakes that he's making. It's rather to get it all out of the way now, and Kevin Byard sort of touched on it a little bit. He said that this is what it's supposed to look like when a rookie quarterback plays a young top 10 defense in the NFL, all in good spirit, but he also stated that these rough days will only help Caleb Williams, and I think that's pretty much where I fall as well. You know, there was some good also from yesterday's practice in OTAs. There were some good connections on some screens and good connections, a good relationship sort of starting to build there with DeAndre Swift, so that was a nice positive as well. Also a few nice throws just in general from Caleb Williams on those 7-on-7s to DJ Moore and Gerald Everett as well. Matt Eberflus also said he's already seen some growth from Caleb Williams yesterday in understanding concepts, some of the coverages. Yeah, he struggled with some of it, but he is starting to learn from those mistakes very quickly, which is something you'd love to see from a guy that they put a lot of stock into. To see him learn quickly right after that, ask questions on it, is something certainly that you can build on. And also, offensive coordinators Shane Waldron and Matt Eberflus as well also said that they're not holding back at all on Caleb Williams. You know, they're not taking it easy on him just because he's a rookie. He has gotten all this hype. He has been touted as one of the best quarterbacks, like I mentioned before, to come out in the NFL draft. So there's no reason to hold back on him, to keep the training wheels on for that long. They're not holding back, and they really want to see him try and pick up this offense as quickly as a professional quarterback who has been doing this for a while would usually do it. And they've been pretty impressed with how quickly he's taking in all that information and relaying it back out in the huddle. Yeah, there's some mistakes, but at the same time, they are seeing that growth, and I think that's also really important to see right now for Caleb Williams, because it shows, one, that your defense is a high-caliber defense. You don't want a first-year player going in there and picking them apart. If he's as good as advertised, he will, like he did in the first day, but also the defense has to show some sort of hold there to show their capabilities, and I love that from the Chicago Bears players, not taking it easy on Caleb Williams, and it's great competition, and it just shows more motivation as well for Caleb to study harder. It only grows that chip on his shoulder even more to go out there and sort of prove those guys wrong, stick it to them the next practice, and that's really the best part of the OTAs period, when you can't really hit anybody. You go out there, try to perform better, work on these technical things more, and beat the opposing defense, even if it's your own defense, that way, rather than going out there and hitting some guys and being stronger or more physical than them. I think that's one of the coolest parts about this part of the offseason, and also it's good to hear him make some mistakes, but also keep a positive outlook and learn from it. That was according to DJ Moore, what he's seen from Caleb Williams so far. And, they have the you have to see the whole offense together as well. I sort of prefaced it by saying some of them missed out on the first week of OTAs, but next week when you get more players in there and you get full strength offense versus full strength defense, I think that'll be more entertaining. And it's another chance to see Caleb Williams grow with what he can do with the full offense. Right now, it's a little bit bumpy for the young quarterback, but it isn't anything to sweat about. He's going to do great. I think they got their guy finally in Chicago. I'm very excited to see him come September and throughout the whole regular season, how he tries to change the narrative around the Chicago Bears. But that'll do it for that segment. I'll go to a quick break right now, and on the other side of it, we'll talk about some future plans in the NFL, around some future plannings on the Super Bowls and how it could be coming to a new stadium in Tennessee and to the great city of Nashville in 2028. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to wrap up the week with this last segment. I sort of talked about a little bit on the Jaguars' new stadium, that coming to the NFL in 2027, if my memory serves me right. So now we'll transition a little bit now to the Tennessee Titans, I should say, and their plans for a new stadium. Theirs was actually announced last offseason in August of 2023, and the Titans announced their new $2.1 billion stadium to be ready by February of 2027. That news of the specific month came out more recently, but the new stadium will have a dome on it. They'll have also less capacity held at the stadium, but better sight lines to the actual field and the game as part of the new modernized, very high-tech look to the stadium. If you haven't seen it already, I'm sure you can find it. It's been out there already for a while now, so it looks pretty cool, but that'll come in a few years. It isn't a renovation, so the Tennessee Titans will continue to play at their stadium through 2026. And once 2027 comes, hopefully it all comes according to plan and they're able to play in that new stadium as part of the new deal and the funding from the city of Nashville and Tennessee as well. They agreed to a 30-year lease as well to ensure the Tennessee Titans stayed in Tennessee for the next 30 years. So that also comes with it, trying to ward off any plans of them maybe relocating to anywhere. I think it's good for the state of Tennessee and also for the city of Nashville to keep them there. There is a lot of attraction just with the city itself. You have a lot of people going there regardless, and now to have a new stadium being built there, a $1.26 billion in public funding, the largest public funding subsidy ever for an American stadium, just exceeding the Bills' $850 million approval for their new stadium as well. But that sort of brings up now the bigger topic about a potential Super Bowl now coming to Nashville if the NFL continues with their trend of sort of rewarding a new stadium. If it looks great and there's a lot of positive feedback early on, they usually give one of these new stadiums a Super Bowl, the opportunity and privilege to hold such a massive game. And if the the Tennessee Titans stadium looks great and has a lot of positive feedback, like I said, I don't see them going away from that. And it all sort of lines up perfectly in a sense because the next 3 Super Bowls are this year in New Orleans, technically in 2025, then in Santa Clara in 2026, and then in Los Angeles in 2027. Obviously in February, they're all booked until then. Oddly enough, this new stadium will be finished by February of 2027, ready for the fall of 2027. So could the NFL reward them right away and give them the privilege of hosting the Super Bowl there in 2028? Roger Goodell was asked about it at the NFL owners meeting this week on Tuesday. He was asked about just the idea, the possibility of bringing the Super Bowl to Nashville, and he said, "I think the stadium is going to be amazing. We know the passion of the fans here. We experienced the draft here, and I think a Super Bowl here would be very successful." You also had Tennessee's governor, Bill Lee, also recently advocate again for the Super Bowl to be in Nashville. He actually said he advocated for it 6 years ago when he took office. So this has been an idea floated around there for some time now, and it is difficult because of Nashville. The city is great, and then bringing the Super Bowl to the current stadium that the Tennessee Titans have right now, that might be looked at with a weird look. Why is the Super Bowl being played in Nashville? It usually is in a bigger market and stuff like that. So with the new stadium coming there, and if it all turns out great, I think this is a great opportunity to bring more people to the city of Nashville and sort of get to know it a little bit better, enjoy the Super Bowl, and have more people just in that market for Tennessee and Nashville as well. It'll do great also for the Tennessee Titans as a whole. If you get more people in there, have more positive reviews on the stadium, hopefully, it'll only do great things for the Tennessee Titans as well. And also, with recent news of the construction recently getting underway, it already has begun on the new stadium. It is just a few miles away from where the Tennessee Titans play currently, but it should be still in close proximity to where the stadium is now, so there won't be a lot of major changes in regards to traveling within the city and stuff like that, and no major real changes occurring to other major parts of the city as well, because it is a new stadium. Again, I'll re-emphasize that, and trying to change such a huge project from one area to another one could come with certainly a lot of problems, but it seems like the two have gone over that recently. And with saying that, the Jags also, I'll bring the Jaguars back into this conversation a little bit just because their new stadium is set to be done around 2027 as well, and how the determination is done between the Jaguars possibly getting it, down there in Florida, another attractable market to the NFL. They've had a lot of events at Hard Rock Stadium down there in Miami. I would think that Jacksonville is also just as an attractive venue for a Super Bowl and just for people to come anyway because the weather's always great. How the NFL makes that determination between Nashville and Jacksonville, I think will be a pretty fun battle, I guess I would say, between the two of them to host the Super Bowl in 2028. But regardless of who goes first, I think it's only a matter of when one of these teams and their new stadiums gets to host a Super Bowl. Pretty exciting, again, for Tennessee, that now ushers in a new era with Brian Callahan, some more exciting players, and now a new stadium. If Will Levis, again, like we talked about before, pans out to be this great quarterback, also another attraction to come to Nashville and in Tennessee, I think it'll be a great situation right now brewing for the Tennessee Titans if, again, I emphasize if, it all goes according to plan for them in a division that I started this whole episode talking about there being a ton of young talent, and with that young talent comes uncertainty at times. You want to preserve that and make sure that that develops into a great quarterback one day, but you don't really know. And hopefully with this and the Tennessee Titans, hopefully that goes according to plan for them and it all works out well in the end for them to have a lot of fans at this new stadium, have just everything working for them by 2027 and 2028. We're certainly going to have to wait a while for this to happen, but it gives Will Levis and this Tennessee Titans team to develop and grow into a pretty competitive team there in that division, where the Texans seem to be the favorite right now, but Tennessee is slowly building something there. Don't count them out just yet. I like what they've done so far. Now it just becomes about execution from them and their new head coach there in Brian Callahan. But in saying that, that'll pretty much do it for this episode. I want to thank you guys for tuning in again to this rendition of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of the network's content outside of sports as well. If you want to see more of me and this show, make sure to check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for every live recorded show that is on both channels, YouTube shorts that are posted on there as well every weekday, and also individual segment videos. If you don't have time to watch a whole episode, you can tune in to a specific segment and watch that at your leisure. As a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions, conversations around the NFL and just football in general with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thank you guys for joining me. Hope you guys all have a great Memorial Day weekend, and I'll see you guys back here on Memorial Day on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.